As we come together in this period of quiet contemplation, let us remember that the purpose of our gathering is not to acquire more information, nor to add another layer of belief to what we already hold. We are here for one reason only: to turn within, to become still enough so that the truth, which has always been present at the center of our being, may reveal itself. The world we see with the eyes is a world of division, of opposing forces, of good set against evil, of health resisting disease, of abundance struggling against lack. And as long as we accept these appearances at face value, we remain prisoners of the very conditions we seek to escape. But the infinite way invites us into a higher vision, a spiritual vision, in which we gently lay down the belief that life is governed by two powers. For in truth, there are not two powers. There never were. There is only the one presence, the one life, the one consciousness expressing itself as all that is. It is this realization, even when it first dawns in the faintest whisper, that begins to dissolve the fear and struggle that characterize the human scene. So as we rest together in this sacred moment, let us set aside every attempt to get something from God, every desire to improve the human picture, and simply open ourselves to the possibility that a deeper reality is already here, closer than breathing, waiting only for our recognition. If we can be still for a moment, if we can let the personal sense of striving fall away, the presence that has never left us will announce itself, not through words, but through a quiet assurance that the one power is already in the midst of us. And it is from this inner silence that our journey into the realization of one power truly begins. As we proceed deeper into this meditation of truth, let us consider for a moment the nature of human suffering, not the individual forms it may take, but the underlying root from which all discord grows. And you will discover, as you quietly observe, that every fear, every frustration, every sense of limitation arises from one fundamental illusion: the belief that there is a power apart from God. It may appear as disease, it may appear as financial pressure, it may appear as conflict between individuals or nations, but the form does not matter. Behind every appearance lies the same hypnotic suggestion that something has existence, presence, or authority outside of the one infinite presence. As long as we accept this belief, even unconsciously, the mind remains divided, attempting to safeguard itself from an imagined power that seems able to harm, destroy, or obstruct the harmony of our lives. This is the universal mesmerism that governs the world of sense, and it operates without our consent as long as we are unaware of it. But the moment we begin to question the reality of this second power, a light dawns within us, and we see that the struggle was never against an external force. It was against our own acceptance of that force as real. Now, the infinite way does not ask us to fight these appearances or resist them. It asks only that we recognize their nature. For the moment we see that no condition, no circumstance, no person has power in and of itself, we are no longer held in bondage. The fear dissolves, not because we have conquered a problem, but because we have withdrawn the belief that gave it life. And so, in this part of our contemplation, let us accept the simple but transforming truth that there is only one power operating in this universe, and that power is God. Everything contrary to this is but a shadow thrown by the belief in separation. When that belief is surrendered, the shadow disappears of itself, and we stand in the light of spiritual freedom as we turn more deeply within. Let us contemplate this one power that stands behind all life. It is essential to understand that the power of God does not operate as the human mind imagines power to function. It is not a force that crushes an opposing force, nor a strength that must assert itself against conditions or circumstances. The one power has no opponent because nothing exists outside of it. And so, the power of God is not loud, it is not dynamic in the way the world considers dynamism, it does not act with visible display, it is a silent presence, an invisible activity of divine being that is forever expressing itself as harmony, order, and completeness. This power is not somewhere off in the distance, waiting to be invoked. It is the very life of your being in this moment, the substance of your consciousness, the essence of your breath. And because it is everywhere equally present, it requires no movement, no effort, no intervention from without. It simply is now. When we speak of God as omnipotence, we are not speaking of a deity who wields power over creation, but of a presence so complete, so all-inclusive, that nothing can stand apart from it. The reason discord appears to have power is that we, in our unawareness, endow it with a reality it does not possess. The moment we withdraw that belief, the appearance loses its seeming authority, for it never had power of its own. In this way, the one power is not a power that must be applied or summoned. It is a presence that must be recognized, and that recognition does not occur through words, but through a quiet inner knowing that rises spontaneously when the mind becomes still. It is in that stillness that we begin to feel the nature of God as peace, as assurance, as the gentle certainty that all is well because God is the all of all. There is no place where the one power is absent, and no circumstance in which it is inactive. In the degree that we rest in this realization, even for a brief moment, the hypnotic sense of duality begins to dissolve. We no longer see the world as a battleground of forces contending with one another, but as the expression of a single spiritual presence revealing itself through form. And so, our work is simply to abide in the awareness that God is one, God is all, and God is here, functioning as the very life we live. As we continue our meditation on the nature of spiritual power, it becomes necessary to recognize why the human mind so readily accepts the belief in two powers. The reason is simple. We have been trained from birth to trust what the senses report. And the senses, in their very functioning, can only reveal a world of duality. They show us health and disease, abundance and lack, safety and danger, life and death. They interpret these as actualities, as forces acting upon us from without, and we, not knowing otherwise, accept the testimony of the senses as truth. But this is precisely where the deception lies. The world that appears to us is not the world of God's creation. It is the world interpreted through the limited faculties of human perception, and because the senses cannot perceive spirit, they form an image of reality that is divided, unstable, and always in conflict. This is why Joel taught so insistently, "Judge not according to appearances, for if we judge by what the eyes see or the ears hear, we will inevitably conclude that there are powers opposed to good, powers capable of harming, obstructing, or destroying the harmony of God's universe. Yet the moment we look beneath the appearance, even slightly, a different pattern emerges. Where the senses perceive disease, spirit reveals the wholeness of divine life. Where the senses perceive lack, spirit reveals the fullness of infinite supply. Where the senses perceive conflict, spirit reveals the indivisible unity of God as the only presence. The appearance does not change first, the consciousness changes, and the appearance follows. Now, this does not mean we are to deny the appearance or pretend it is not there. It means we are to recognize its nature. An appearance has no law, no substance, and no power of its own. Its seeming reality is derived entirely from our acceptance of it as a self-existent condition. When we remove that acceptance, when we quietly turn within and remember that nothing can rise up against the one presence, the appearance begins to lose its hypnotic hold. It does not dissolve because we battled it or attempted to change it. It dissolves because the belief that sustained it has been withdrawn. In this way, we begin to live in the world without being governed by it. We see the images presented by the senses, but we do not grant them authority. We acknowledge them, but we do not bow before them. Instead, we rest in the spiritual understanding that behind every appearance stands the same eternal, perfect, and indivisible presence. This recognition, held gently and without strain, becomes the beginning of freedom. There comes a moment on this path when something within us shifts, not by effort, not by study, not by seeking, but by grace. It is not accompanied by thunder or great emotion. It is more like a quiet lifting of a veil, a soft recognition that what we have feared, resisted, or struggled against never possessed power of its own. We begin to sense, perhaps very faintly at first, that the presence of God is not something we reach out toward. It is the very life that is already functioning within us, and in that instant, the belief in a second power weakens. This is not an intellectual conclusion. It is not the result of logically convincing oneself that only one power exists. It is a spiritual awareness, arising from a depth within us that the mind cannot penetrate. In that moment, you may find that a problem which has occupied your thought suddenly seems less threatening, not because it has been solved outwardly, but because its foundation has been removed. For all fear depends upon the belief that something besides God is present and active. When that belief dissolves, even partially, fear has nothing left to stand upon. This inner awakening may occur while reading a passage of Scripture, or while sitting silently, or in the midst of daily activity. It may come as a gentle assurance. This cannot harm, for God alone is. Or it may arise as a quiet inner shift in which you simply feel released from the pressure of the appearance. Whatever its form, the essence is the same. The false sense of a second power begins to lose its seeming reality. From this point forward, you may find that you no longer approach challenges with the same urgency or anxiety. You see the appearance, but something in you remains calm, anchored, unmoved. This is not indifference. It is recognition. It is the dawning awareness that the only presence operating in your world is the presence of God, and that the condition before you is but a shadow cast by former beliefs. As this awakening deepens, life becomes less of a struggle and more of an unfolding. You no longer feel compelled to change, fix, improve, or defend. Instead, you rest in the quiet assurance that the one power is always present, always active, and always fulfilling its own nature as harmony, completeness, and peace. The moment the belief in a second power dissolves even slightly, you step out of the world of effect and into the realm of spiritual cause. And from that standpoint, You discover that nothing external holds authority over your life. This is the beginning of spiritual freedom. Not freedom gained, but freedom revealed. As the belief in two powers begins to dissolve within us, there unfolds a subtle but profound transformation, a change not in the outer scene, but in the awareness with which we behold it. It is as though the veil that once separated us from spiritual vision becomes thinner, more transparent, and we find ourselves seeing the same world through new eyes. Nothing has altered externally, yet everything appears differently because our consciousness has shifted, and in this shift, life begins to take on an entirely new character. The first sign of this transformation is the quiet disappearance of fear, not because we have developed courage, not because conditions have improved, but because the foundation of fear, the belief that something exists apart from God, has been removed. Once the mind ceases to grant reality to a second power, fear has no foothold. It falls away of itself. You may still meet the same appearances that once troubled you, but they no longer grip you in the same way. You look upon them with a calm recognition. This has no law, no substance, no power. Only God is. This silent knowing becomes the atmosphere in which you live. Along with fear, struggle begins to fade. The human sense of constantly striving to improve health, striving to secure supply, striving to find peace, loosens its hold. For struggle is always born of the belief that something is lacking, something must be achieved, something must be gained from outside of ourselves. But the moment we recognize that the fullness of God is already the life of our being, the compulsion to strive falls away. We begin to understand that harmony is not something we create, it is something we discover through stillness. In this new way of seeing, prayer also undergoes a quiet transformation. It shifts from an activity of asking, pleading, or affirming to an activity of listening. We no longer attempt to bring God into the situation or to influence divine action. Instead, prayer becomes an inner resting in the presence that already is. We discover the truth of Joel's teaching, that prayer is not a reaching outward, but an opening inward, where the Spirit reveals itself in the sacred silence. In that silence, we feel the assurance that all is well, not because appearances have changed, but because we have touched the reality behind them. Healing, too, takes on a new meaning. It is no longer the attempt to correct a condition or remove an error. It is the recognition that the condition never possessed spiritual law. Healing occurs not by dealing with the effect, but by dissolving the false belief that produced it. And when the belief dissolves, the effect follows naturally. This is why the Infinite Way places no emphasis on changing the outer picture. It points instead to the inner realization of truth as the means through which harmony appears. Even relationships are seen anew. No longer do we look to persons for love, security, or fulfillment. We see them as the transparency through which the one life expresses itself. We cease expecting others to supply what only God can give. And in that freedom, relationships become harmonious, not because people have changed, but because we no longer draw upon them as though they were separate sources of good. This transformation does not come with fanfare. It is quiet, gentle, steady, but it marks the beginning of a new life, a life in which the world of appearances loses its power to disturb, and the inner light of truth begins to govern our experience. From this awareness, we no longer react to the world, we behold it. We no longer fight conditions, we understand their nature, and in that understanding, we rise above them, not through effort, but through realization. This is the new way of seeing that emerges when the belief in two powers disappears. A life lived not from fear, but from spiritual assurance. Not from struggle, but from grace. Not from the senses, but from the quiet knowing of the presence that is always here. As we continue to abide in the recognition of one presence and one power, it becomes clear that this realization is not reserved for special moments of meditation alone. It is meant to permeate our daily living, to become the atmosphere in which we walk, speak, act, and rest. The spiritual life is not a separate compartment within human experience. It is the very essence of our being, expressing itself moment by moment through the awareness we bring to each activity, and so our practice is not the attempt to hold on to truth through tension or remembrance, but the gentle, relaxed opening to the presence that is already functioning as our life. The first movement of this practice is the simple pause. Many times throughout the day, without fanfare or ritual, we close our eyes briefly, or even with eyes open, turn inward, and acknowledge the truth. There is only one presence here. There is only one power operating. This quiet pause interrupts the habitual momentum of the human mind, which is always tempted to assign power to persons, conditions, and circumstances. In that brief moment of recognition, we withdraw the belief that anything external can influence the harmony of our being. This practice, repeated gently and without strain, begins to cultivate an inner atmosphere of peace that stays with us throughout the day. The second movement is the withdrawal of fear from appearances. When you are confronted with anything that seems disturbing, a report of illness, a financial concern, a moment of conflict, the temptation will be to judge the appearance as having power, to respond emotionally, to react with resistance. But in that moment, quietly and inwardly, we remember this appearance has no power of its own. God alone is. We are not denying what the senses report. We are recognizing its nature. We are seeing through it as one sees through a faint shadow once its source is understood. And as this recognition becomes habitual, fear loses its foundation. The third movement is resting in silence. Meditation in the infinite way is not a technique nor a method to attain something. It is simply the relaxation of the personal sense of self, the surrender of mental effort, the opening to an inner stillness in which truth reveals itself. We do not enter meditation with a purpose or a request. We enter with receptivity, for it is in the silence when thought becomes quiet, when desire ceases, that the presence announces itself. Do not be concerned with results. The silence itself is the demonstration. The silence is the presence. The fourth movement is listening. True prayer, as Joel taught, is not the speaking of words, but the hearing of the inner word. In the stillness, we await the gentle movement of spirit within. It does not come as a voice or a message with form. It comes as peace, as assurance, as a subtle shift in consciousness that says, without saying, I am here. This listening is the highest form of prayer, for in it we relinquish the personal will and allow divine activity to take over. The fifth movement is allowing grace to act. Once we have paused, withdrawn belief from appearances, rested in silence, and listened, we do not return to the world with the intention to make truth operate. We do not attempt to fix, to solve, or to direct. We move through our day quietly, trusting that the inner realization will express itself outwardly in its own way, in its own time. Our part is recognition, God's part is fulfillment. Grace functions where the personal self has stepped aside. In this way, the practice becomes a continuous unfolding rather than a scheduled activity. It becomes the way we walk into a room, the way we answer the telephone, the way we respond to challenges. It becomes our natural state of being. And as this awareness deepens, we discover that the world no longer impresses us with the weight it once held. We move through experience with a softness, a spaciousness, a quiet assurance that does not come from the human mind but from the spirit that lives as us. This is the daily practice of one power, not as a discipline, but as a way of life. As this awareness of one power becomes the atmosphere of our daily living, there comes a time when the inner realization begins to express itself outwardly in ways subtle yet unmistakable. We find, not through effort but through grace, that a new life is beginning to unfold, one that is not shaped by human will, not governed by fear, and not dependent upon external forms for its harmony. It is not that we have improved the old life. Rather, a new dimension of life is emerging from within, revealing itself through our consciousness of the one presence. In this new life, we discover that harmony is not something we create, it is something that naturally manifests. When the obstructing beliefs have been dissolved, as the sense of a second power fades, we no longer meet the world with suspicion, protection, or defensiveness. We move through experience with a quiet openness, trusting that the same presence that governs the universe also governs every detail of our existence. This trust is not blind. It arises from the unmistakable feeling of being carried, upheld, and lived by a presence greater than the personal self. Relationships begin to reflect this inner transformation, because we no longer look to others as sources of good or as threats to our peace. We meet them without the burdens of expectation or fear. We do not try to change people or draw something from them. Instead, we see through the appearance of personhood to the one life expressing itself in infinite forms, and in this recognition, a new gentleness enters our interactions. Misunderstandings resolve more quickly, conflicts soften, and the need to control or defend disappears. The transparency of our own consciousness allows the presence to flow unobstructed. The same is true in matters of supply. When we cease believing that circumstances, organizations, or individuals hold power over our well-being, a freedom opens within us. Supply is seen not as something to acquire, but as an infinite flow that becomes visible in whatever form is appropriate to the moment. We are no longer anxious about how or when, because the realization of one power assures us that what is needed is already present in consciousness. The outer form appears as a natural consequence of inner realization, not as the result of human striving. Even the body responds to this new awareness. Where once it seemed vulnerable, subject to conditions and influences beyond our control, it now reveals itself as the instrument through which the presence expresses. We do not attempt to heal or improve the body. Rather, we recognize that its true substance is the life of God. This recognition lifts the burden of fear and allows the body to function harmoniously according to the rhythm of the spirit rather than the anxieties of the human mind. More than anything, the emerging life is marked by peace, not a peace dependent on the absence of difficulty, but a peace that persists even when appearances suggest otherwise. This peace arises from the certainty that there is only one presence at work, and that nothing can enter our experience except what emanates from that presence. We no longer measure life by its outer events, but by the depth of inner stillness that accompanies us. This stillness becomes our home, our refuge, our sanctuary, and as this new life takes form, we begin to understand what it means to be the transparency of God. We realize that the personal self is not the actor, not the doer, not the creator. We are the window through which the infinite shines, the instrument through which the presence flows. The more the personal sense of self dissolves, the more freely the divine expresses. And in that expression we discover the true meaning of spiritual living, not the shaping of life by human means, but the effortless unfolding of grace. This is not a life we manufacture. It is the life that emerges when we stop believing in two powers and let the one reveal itself. As we bring this period of contemplation to a close, let us return once more to the simplicity of truth, the quiet center from which all spiritual realization arises. We have considered the nature of the one power, the appearance of many, and the dissolving of the belief in duality. Yet the essence of all we have spoken is found not in the words, not in the ideas, and not in the teachings themselves, but in the silent awareness that stands behind them. For the truth of God is not something spoken, it is something felt, something known in the depths of consciousness when the mind is still enough to receive it. Let us then rest for a moment in the recognition that there is only one presence, not a presence far off, not a presence that must be invited or invoked, but a presence that has been here all along, closer than breathing, nearer than hands and feet, the very life of our being. This presence is not divided, not opposed, not threatened. It is whole, complete, indivisible. And because it is the only presence, it is the only power, nothing can rise up against the one, for nothing exists outside of it. If there is any sense of struggle remaining within you, simply acknowledge that it comes not from a condition, not from a problem, but from the fleeting belief that something other than God is present. The moment you withdraw that belief, even slightly, the struggle begins to dissolve. You need not fight it, you need only return to the quiet recognition God alone is. Let this be not a statement of faith, but an inner seeing, a gentle awareness that flows naturally when the mind ceases to depend upon appearances. As you step back into the activities of daily living, carry this awareness lightly. Do not try to hold it. Do not attempt to maintain it through effort. Truth does not need your will to support it. Simply return again and again, whenever the thought comes, to the recognition of the one presence. In that recognition, fear loses its foundation, struggle fades, and harmony reveals itself, not because you have created it, but because it was always there, awaiting your remembrance. Let this be your practice, a quiet resting in the assurance that the one presence is living your life, guiding your steps, unfolding your path. You are not moving through the world alone. You are the transparency through which God expresses himself. And as you abide in this awareness, you will find that everything necessary for your journey is provided, not by effort, but by grace. Let us leave this time, then, with a single, simple knowing: one presence, one power, one life, one being, and this one is the truth of your being now, forever, and always.